Hi, this
Hi.
is F. Paul Driscoll for Opera News' Sightlines, and it is my privilege today to have as my guest the brilliant American author Ken Ludwig. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, F. Paul.
And I want to get right in and talk about a very interesting project that you have coming up at Glimmerglass, which opens in July and runs through August. And it's called Tenor Overboard. What is Tenor Overboard? It's a new opera that uses pieces of classic Rossini. Tell me how that project came into being. Whose idea was it?
Well, the idea was Francesca Zambello's. She called me up last August, I think it was, out of the blue. I don't know that we'd met, maybe at some opera function here in DC, but I've admired her for years. And she said, "Hey, I have an idea for an opera that we'd love you to write for us." And that would be a comic opera because you write primarily comedies. And it would use the music of Rossini. He wrote 39 operas, several of them comic operas. And certain things in life are serendipity. I often talk to my brother, who's my dearest friend, but others as well, about the dearth of comic operas in the repertoire. Just
Right.
From the beginning. I mean, I always count 10 exactly that I consider really great comic operas, and that's kind of it. And when new operas come out, the ones that are commissioned, I mean, how many operas are comic operas? None that I know of. So I'd say to my brother, "Oh my God, I'd like to write a comic opera." I'm a music guy, but I don't write music well enough to do it. And Francesca's call comes out of the blue. So it was, what an opportunity. And she said to use Rossini, that would use all Rossini, who's my hero. So it was great.
So when you're constructing something like this, I don't want to give too much of it away, but it's essentially a comedy that takes place on a ship, the
Right.
Lindoro, and
Uh-huh.
it involves a trip to Sicily. Is
Right.
that enough?
Right. That's fine. No,
We
but
won't give away.
I can go further than that.
Sure, but what fascinates me is when you're looking at a blank page, this is going to be sung in Italian, as I understand, but the dialogue will be English.
That's correct.
So were you given a list of characters, or did you come up that, in other words, they said, well, you have to have a tenor, you have to have a mezzo, you have to have a lyric soprano, or did you just do that on your own?
Well, I did that on my own, and Francesca was nice enough and I think wise enough to say to an author, "Look, now that the parameters are, we want a new comic opera. It would be great if it's Rossini, but at one point we talked about, I'm a big Donizetti fan as well,
Mhm.
and we talked about maybe it's just all bel canto." I've worked with Joe Culinary in this, and Kelly Rourke, who's their dramaturge, to talk about things as the project moved on. But from early on, she said Rossini. I thought all Rossini. At one point, we thought maybe all bel canto, but no, there's plenty of Rossini. And because I'm such an opera fan and have studied opera so much, I knew we needed we should spread it out between tenor and a mezzo and a soprano and a bass, have an opera, a basso buffo kind of a character. I wanted to be within the great tradition of bel canto opera, but wanted to write it anew and make it fresh, and hopefully encourage other people to do more comic operas.
And is the cast more or less younger singers? Do you know? Or
They are, well, some yes, some no. I do know the cast; they're all chosen, and they're terrific. We did a reading of the what I call the play or the opera. I better start calling it the opera. uh, and they're wonderful. Our Basso Buffo has been around for ages doing that kind of work. It's a. I wrote it with a young cast in mind because I knew we were going to use some of the Glimmer Glass uh, um,
Young artists.
young artists. Some are, some not, and because it's about, it's a. I'm a big fan of screwball comedies of the
Right.
1930s and 40s. I mean, that's kind of what I try to write, and that requires young people. Roz Russell was 32 when she filmed His Girl Friday. Uh,
Mhm.
it's a comedy is a young person's medium often, that kind of comedy. So it does have all those parts. I decided that I wanted, because of I'm such a fan of who isn't, Lenotte and other things, is that I thought maybe the leading couple ought to be a mezzo and a baritone,
Mhm.
and that's what I chose, and that's what we stuck to. So it was, because they're the leading romantic duo. It was a little trickier to find their love song and so on, but we did, and so it works.
Well, I mean, one of the most brilliant plays of the last 50 years in terms of comedies is your Lend Me a Tenor, which has a semi-operatic setting. There is at least one character who is two characters who are opera singers, and then someone who's an aspiring opera singer. But it's a brilliantly conducted and crafted farce. And I would imagine that a lot of that came together in rehearsals with you working with Jerry Zaks in that case, or when you were working with Mike Ockrent on Crazy for You. Do you see the same thing happening here with all this music and this Rossinian stuff? I mean, are you going to have time to tweak? Is that something you're looking forward to?
Well, interesting. The two of the things you say are interesting. One is, when I write plays, I tend to write them and they don't. Well, sure, during previews, I roll up my sleeves and make
Yeah,
changes here and there. They don't have, you've never had a groundswell of changes. So they get pushed and they get molded. And of course, directors as genius level as Jerry and Mike, have so much to add in ways we cast it, but the play usually stays pretty much the same. Um, uh, um, uh, but opera, as you're suggesting, is different. And I've just written an essay about actually this for Glimmerglass, which may have appeared already or will be coming out very soon, is how different it was for me as a playwright and someone who's used to shepherding plays. I've written 32 now, maybe plays across, from beginning to casting to producers right to the end, and I'm in charge of those. I'm always in charge. I'm in charge of casting. I'm in charge of every minute, and it's different in opera because of the music element. So having to choose the pieces and quick enough to get them in the right keys, and Joe working his magic of putting the score together. I just got the whole thing and it's like this thick because it's a piano score with everything in it, and the translations. I'm going to be working on lyrics and doing new super titles and to make them fun and interesting. So, but it has to be frozen early because of the music elements.
right.
Completely not true in plays. In
Yeah,
plays, I'm changing lines to the last preview.
yeah.
Yeah.
With this, when you're choosing the music, you're choosing arias, obviously, that are already done and have been done for a while. Are you changing the lyrics in Italian at all to suit the situation that you created with your
Now
play?
and then, a little bit, not radically enough to pervert their intention. But if I need to sort of change the angle of where the love affair is at that point, yes. And of course, a lot of them are a lot of duets, trios, quartets, finales. Of course, it's an Italian comic opera, so there's a storm scene.
Is there an element of putting it together in a way that, how do I say this? I mean, what comes first in this case? Is it the words or the music? because it's the old question of the, prima la parola or whatever. But this, I think it's obviously a situation that people are going to be really closely paying attention to the words and the dialogue, and then the music comes in. Or do you think that the music will take over? Because if you're working with a genius like Rossini, how can he not?
Well, yes, but the the libretto had to come first,
Yeah.
and then I had to find some. What it is kind of a jukebox opera. You know how they
Ah,
talk about jukebox musicals. I wrote one, Crazy for You, which
yeah.
is taking the existing work of composers, and it's like Mamma Mia. And here I was doing it with opera, taking existing songs and duets and trios. In reading one of your terrific Opera News articles recently about Sir Walter Scott, I noticed that somebody, Antonio, I forget his last name, wrote a pasticcio, what they called a pasticcio, which was using Rossini to write a version of Ivanhoe.
Yeah.
And this is a pasticcio in that sense. It's not been done very often, if at all, in opera. I know that, of course, that Handel piece was done at the Met, but that was a lot of different composers.
Yeah.
This is one composer. I don't know that this has ever been done before, but but then what I had to do is, knowing that with 39 operas and all the emotions I could find in Rossini and comedy moments, that I would write as comic a story as I could in the screwball comedy genre that I love so much, because that's why I'm here in this project, and then find the songs that would work. And then, of course, as I did with Crazy for You, find a song that almost works, so adjust the libretto here and there as I go along. So they kind of work in sync.
And Crazy for You was sort of a riff on Girl Crazy, sort of.
Sort of. When Roger Horchow, the producer, first came to me, he wanted me to write an adaptation of Girl Crazy. Exactly right, because it had a really high number of great hits.
Yeah.
I Got Rhythm, Embraceable You. And I read it and I said, look, Roger, that's not going to happen, because it was really old fashioned in that it was almost blackout sketches, barely hung together with a plot. Some of them were offensive to us today because of ethnic things and so on. So I said, no, I can't do that. I'll write a whole new musical. But what I'll do is I'll take one bit of it, which is an Easterner going west, and keep that, because that allowed me to keep two songs from the original that are kind of function as book songs. Could You Use Me? They talk about being out west and so on. So I borrowed that idea and then wrote everything from scratch. So it's as a new musical.
Do you have a favorite Rossini opera of your own? Being an opera fan, you must have seen quite a few of them.
I have. I mean, whose favorite in a way isn't, Barbieri? So I guess that would be obvious. Huge fan of Cenerentola, huge fan of Italian Girl, huge fan of Il Turco in Italia.
Mhm.
The later ones where he's at his absolute height, just composing great. The early ones are great and interesting. Sesto, you know these better than I do. And there are individuals. We're drawing on, I think, 13 different operas
Mhm.
in this, um, and not that much from the big standards. There's one bit from Barbieri, one Cenerentola, one Italian Girl, and then other places, and others. It starts out with a song he wrote, actually, not. I can tell a little bit more about the story in the sense that it opens in Little Italy in America, where two sisters are on the run from their father, who's the basso buffo, who wants one of them to marry a man she doesn't want to marry. So I tried to use those kind of conventions. And in fleeing their father, they end up on a cruise ship heading back to Sicily, because I wanted the glamour of, anything goes kind of situation. And that's where most of the action happens.
You mentioned His Girl Friday. Do you have a favorite screwball comedy or favorite screwball comedy director?
Yeah, Howard Hawks.
Uh-huh.
And he invented what's been now defined as the Hawksian woman, which is the prototype of Roz Russell, Katharine Hepburn, and Bringing Up Baby. These wildly screwball women who are strong and know what they want, and they're funny, and they look at themselves from an angle of knowing who they are and being, chic and tough and strong, and Howard Hawks was my favorite of the directors. Yeah,
He was great. Carol Lombard worked with him as well and was really good. Yes.
the 20th century, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I
Do
think that's sort of
you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite? Tell me. I'm in screwball comedy. I'm licking my chops here.
actually the one I can't not watch it whenever it's on is a Paramount comedy from 1939 called Midnight with Don Amici and Claudia
I love
Colbert.
Midnight. I
Yeah.
love Midnight. You can't get it anymore. I can't download it. It doesn't stream, and I don't think the video. I've watched it 50 times.
To me, it's amazing because there's so many. It's the best screwball comedies like that, or Front Page, have these little moments that literally fly by. There's nothing that's served up too fast. And so all of those scenes in the dress salon or at the gambling table or the taxi drivers.
Barrymore is great in it.
Oh, Barrymore's fantastic.
Another great one that I love that's not as center, that some people don't know, is Libeled Lady.
Oh, yes, with Myrna Loy and Jean Harlow.
Jean Harlow is incredible, and Spencer Tracy
and William Powell.
So it's the foursome that are just amazing.
Well, I mean, William Powell was his own law. I mean, during the pandemic, a friend and I watched movies and talked about them, and he had his first experience of The Thin Man, which was very gratifying that he loved it as much as I hoped he would.
Yeah.
It's an amazing piece. So speaking of something that's got a connection to the movies, you've got a project coming up you just touched on before we started recording in England, Murder on the Orient Express, adapted for the stage. How did that project fall into your lap, or was that something you went after?
It's not something I went after. I usually just sit in my little hidey hole and write. That's what I do. That's all I do. I have another one I got to tell you about too, called Lend Me a Soprano. Don't let me forget.
Okay.
That's come out. My agent at WME, Jonathan Loma, got a call out of the blue from the Agatha Christie estate about 5-6 years ago. And they said, none of Miss Christie's, Lady Agatha's work has been adapted for the stage in about 30 years. She did some obviously very famous, 3 of them knockout famously. After that, there were a couple that were done, here and there that have toured, but never got any prominence. And we'd really now, 30 years later, and we'd like to bring her back to the stage. Would Ken like to do one? And I was, he called me, and I was just immensely flattered. And they said he can choose whichever one he wants. And I chose Murder on the Orient Express because I thought it was the best title.
Yeah.
And I thought, it's iconic in many ways. And though it's a great ending, most people don't remember these endings. That's not a worry that people are going to know who done it. Mm-hmm. And I chose it, and I rolled up my sleeves and I wrote it. And her grandson, Matthew Pritchard, who ran Agatha Christie Limited, their company, flew over to America. We went over my first draft. He'd say, Poirot might not say that way. And I said, okay. And now his son, James Pritchard, is Agatha's great grandson, is in charge of it. And I'm heading over to London soon. Whenever I'm over there, I see him. And we're about to embark on this amazing adventure because the Chichester Festival in England, which is south of London, which feeds tons of shows into the West End. That's what they do a lot. And we're, of course we have our fingers crossed, but that doesn't mean we have any better shot than anybody else. And we'll see what the reviews are. But we're doing a nice, big, wonderful, ravishing production. Rob Jones is doing Rob from all his work at the Met. He's doing the set, and it's fantastic. So I was over there 3 weeks ago for the first week of rehearsals, and now I'm back. And now I fly tomorrow, and we go through all the final rehearsals in London, in Chichester, Tech preview, week of previews, and then we open on May 20th in Chichester, followed by a big revival of Crazy for You that Susan Stroman is directing and choreographing that opens at Chichester 6 weeks later. So I'll be
That's
back
exciting.
in my new home. So that's exciting. That's very exciting.
What on Agatha Christie, what is it, do you think, that has made her so eternally appealing? I mean, especially Poirot and Miss Marple, those stories and books have now been around since the 1920s, and they don't show signs of going away. They keep getting adapted and readapted. What is it about that still appeals?
Well, she's remarkably ingenious. I have to say, I got to know her work. Sure, I'd read some, as we all do. You can't exist and not having read some, and admired it. But then when I got into it 5 years ago, I started getting so entertained by her, one plot after another. She's a great plotter. Her genius is not in her style per se. She writes in a very wonderful, straightforward way. We follow everything that's going on. But what's amazing, I just watched, there's a PBS, it's a BBC. Why didn't they ask Evans?
Yeah.
It's just on now, that Hugh Laurie adapted. And the story is just riveting.
Yeah.
And I think it's those stories she came up with.
P.D. James, who was often compared to her, I think they're nothing alike, but obviously they had similar levels of success. But James said that she thought that Christie was like a conjurer that would be turning cards over, and you'd be watching the cards and not realize that she'd given you clues to how the plot was going to unfold long before you got the end. I mean, that's always so tightly constructed, like a puzzle. But I think
I'm not interested in them when I hadn't done any really before. Well, that's not true. That's not true, because maybe one of the reasons, I take it back, I'd written a play called The Games Afoot, and it won the Edgar Award as Best Mystery. So I think that's maybe how why they called me. Now that I say it, I take it back. So I had done a mystery before, but one of the things that attracted me at the time, and now continues to attract me to doing, I've been offered to do another mystery by someone, is that they're a lot like comedies in a way, in their own sort of way. Northrop Frye, the great Canadian literary critic, talks about this in his book on Shakespearean comedy and romance. Is that you start with a world that is sensible and understandable. You don't usually see it at the top of the mystery, because you enter the mystery, as most plays start, when you're the equilibrium is in trouble. So you start with all these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle in the air, and who killed this person, and what happened, who are the suspects. You don't quite understand what's happening, and ultimately fall together, and then they lock into place, and you feel a sense of reassurance and pleasure, and you can relax. And that's what comedies do. That's what comedies in the classic tradition of the screwball comedies are perfect examples. And that's the kind of comedies I write. If you said, "Oh, what does Joe Orton write?" or "What is this?" you'd say, "Well, that doesn't reflect what he's doing," but it reflects what I do, and that all the great classic comedies of the past 300 years, from 400 to start Shakespeare, but then into Goldsmith and Sheridan and Pinero and Wilde and Coward, is that's the form they take, which is similar to a mystery, and that's why I think I'm so attracted to doing mysteries now and then.
I hadn't thought about that, but I think you're right. I mean, mysteries seem, anyway, to me, to function best when they've established a controlled environment. Whether it's on a boat, on an airplane, on a train, in a hospital, something like that, that it's this world within a world. Right.
It's its own world. And like good plays, when you write a play, I'm writing a new comedy right now, and what's always the challenge is you've got it's about one world. Lend Me a Tenor is in a Cleveland hotel room, and it's about a world of operas. An opera is about to begin. Moon Over Buffalo, you're on that backstage world of two aging actors. Fox and the Fairway, you're set at a golf club with a big rivalry between two. Nothing else between two country clubs. Nothing else in the world matters but that you focus on private lives. Those four people on those two balconies. That's where your focus is, and that's what mysteries have to do as well.
So what is the new comedy that you're working on?
Well, I'm always working on new comedies. The one I wanted to mention though is because of opera, because I've done a number of opera things. The Tenor, I did a sort of sequel to Tenor called Comedy of Tenors. I've done a lot. I started out. I wrote a play about Gilbert and Sullivan very, very early called Sullivan and Gilbert. It was done at the Kennedy Center, and the National Theatre of Canada. I decided to write a play, and it's called Lend Me a Soprano, because I decided one of the things I fight is the extent to which the history of theater is so male centric. There's 8 parts for men to 1 part for women, and so I'm always making sure I have female heroines and adding female parts so they're at least all equal in my comedies, and Lend Me a Soprano, the 3 main parts, the head of the opera company and the visiting soprano and little Max, who wants to be an opera singer, are all men. So I decided that I would turn it on its head and make all those female parts. So the head of the opera is, the chairman is a woman, who runs the place, a sort of a Carol Channing type, a tough, woman, who I knew very well, by the way. The visiting opera singer is a wild, crazy soprano. She's a diva, and the young Max character is named Joe, and she's sort of this scruffy young woman who has in her heart that she could sing opera. So I wrote it, but it's a whole new play. It's that, but it's changed a good bit, and it has its world premiere. I just finished it 6 months ago, and the world premiere is at the Alley Theater in Houston in September.
Oh, how nice.
So we're casting it right now.
How long does it take you to do something before you really, I know you're on deadline, but how long do you give yourself to create something like that? Months, years?
I usually write 2 plays a year is pretty standard. Sometimes I can 3 if it's like this Rossini piece. I just felt it in my bones. It's something I'd been thinking of, and oddly in its way, it kind of came out very quickly. I wrote a separate version of it first that was set historically right after the end of Barber of Seville, and I love it, and I'm going to make that into a play now. but then I thought, no, it ought to feel contemporary and fun in the 1930s, more like a screwball. So I wrote this, and that was quick. Most plays, by the time I think them through, I think and take notes for about 2 months, 3 months, and then I can write. I write longhand, so then I can write pretty quickly.
So you don't work on a computer? It's all longhand?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Just old.
No, a lot of people do. Sondheim did, certainly, but that's something that I think a lot of it has to do with the writing that you do is truly creative. So there's nothing in the way, or there's nothing between you and the paper.
That's exactly right. I feel a connection to it. I feel it's the beauty of the words and shape. And I use Neil Simon once gave me advice to use long paper, 8.5 by 13 legal pad, not 8.5 by 11, because ultimately you can see more in the paper, especially when you get to the point where you're sort of outlining the whole play. You can get it all on one page. And it was a great advice. And yeah.
But do you go to the theater and the opera very often just as an observer?
Yeah.
And so what's a favorite evening for you? I mean, is it Wagner? Is it Rossini? Is it Verdi? Is it Kaufman and Hart?
Favorite evenings are Noel Coward, Kaufman and Hart, Rossini, Donna, as I mentioned, Donizetti before. Put me down in Don Pasquale, and I'm the happiest human ever. I just wag my tail happily.
Yeah.
Or Daughter of the Regiment, that Laurent Pelly production at the Met.
Oh, that's so much fun.
I could watch it forever.
Yeah, it's really beautifully done. And I liked the last revival was, did you see it with Stephanie Blythe?
Pretty Yen,
Yes. Uh-huh.
Pretty Yendy and Stephanie Blythe.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
it was, yeah.
Kathleen Turner was the Duchess
Oh, right. Yes, it
of
is.
Krakenthorpe.
Yeah.
But that production I think is beautifully realized. It's quite fun.
Yeah. So again, there's comic,
Oh, but I think that's what keeps it bubbling, for lack of a better word. I think he had such incredible invention. And the other thing too is that obviously because of his relationship with singers, he had affairs with many of them and married and all that. He certainly knew what made them tick and how to provide them with opportunities that still work.
Sure.
And that's what's so wonderful about looking at something like the second act of Daughter of the Regiment. There's so much there for everybody.
Well, also what I love about them, and what I love about Rossini and Donizetti and Falstaff, the second time he tried a comedy, Verdi, is look, I spend my life thinking about comedy, classical comedies and contemporary comedies, and trying to write them in that tradition. And I have a hobby horse, but it's that diminishes it in a way. I have a passion, and my passion is, and I lecture about this and I talk about it, is that comedy is not a genre. There's genres within comedy. There's romantic comedies, there's social comedies, there's comedies of going to the country or the city or this, but comedy is as significant and changes our lives as much as tragedy does.
Yeah.
But it's not taken as seriously by even literary critics, let alone reviewers. And it should be. I mean, I was reading a biography of Rossini lately. I think this was in the famous Stendhal, right? In Rossini's day, they charged more money to go to a tragic opera than a comic opera. 25% difference.
I did not know that.
And it just shows what people think about when they think, oh, we're just going to a frivolous piece. We're not going to spend as much money, or at least so thought this producer down in at the Naples, where he did.
Yeah.
What is it called?
I suppose that in his day, the bigger stars were people that did tragedies, so they cost more. Maybe that's why.
I don't know, but it's an imbalance that's wrong, that I'm spending my life and writing pieces about. And I have a new book coming out called Thoughts on Comedy that are important. Another book I wrote called How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare, again to try to emphasize the comedies in Shakespeare. Yeah. That hey, these are equally valuable, and you should teach them. When my kids went to school, you'd take a Shakespeare class, and it would be the 4 big tragedies. No comedy. Yeah.
Well, for me, I think that Twelfth Night, or As You Like It, whatever you call them, as you say, those are as penetrating and as sobering and as instructive as the big tragedies. Maybe the parts are not, or the characters are not as big, but.
Well, Rosalind is Shakespeare's longest character, female character, and only topped by Hamlet in terms of number of lines.
I think that one thing I remember someone pointing out a while ago is that everyone thinks of The Merchant of Venice as being about Shylock, but Portia actually is on stage much longer and has more lines.
Absolutely right.
And it's her story. It's her dilemma.
That's right. And I mean, talk about great roles. I'm about to go back to go to the Globe, my favorite place. And in 2 nights from now, seeing Much Ado About Nothing. There, those 2 parts.
Yeah.
I mean,
Who's in it? Do you know?
I don't. The Globe is more of a rep company in its
Yeah.
way. I'm talking about the Shakespeare's Globe on the river. There's also a revival of it. A friend of mine is directing that's at the National this year. It's almost at the same time. They're going to have them simultaneously. I want to grab that too. So who doesn't want to play Beatrice and Benedict?
Oh yeah. And I think the other thing about it, which is so mysterious and so wonderful, is when you get people writing about actors like Minnie Maddern Fisk or Ellen Terry, who essentially played for a lot of their careers what we think of as comic parts. I mean, Mrs. Fisk obviously did Ibsen, and
Right.
Ellen Terry did the other stuff. But you read about the comic effect and you realize it's not on the page, but they found it behind the page, if you know what I mean. And that's the mystery with an actor who's a real comic genius. I don't know if you remember Wilfred Hyde-White, but
Oh my God, of course.
seeing him when I was maybe 18 or 19 years old, and he had people gasping
Yes.
with laughs, but then reading the play, which is this thing called the Jockey Club stage.
Jockey Clubs, just what I was going to say. Incredible.
Unbelievable.
Incredible. William Douglas Hume.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, hilarious.
But it's not, I mean, what the author does is give him this wonderful circumstance that he knew what to do with. But I think if you tried to give that to any actor with any training, they'd say, but what makes this funny? And it's amazingly funny in the right hands.
Knew just how to find it. Ellen Terry was famous for her Beatrice, which she played opposite Henry Irving. So she must have found wonderful. Can you imagine what that must have been like, what she found in that play? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've read a lot about her and descriptions of her performances, and it's the voice, it's the look, but also the way she moved and the way, I guess, that she would be able to adjust the tempo to things, and was so fast on stage in a way that he wasn't. But I think that's what made them such a good balance.
Yeah, they must have been terrific on stage. Oh,
must have been. But we're
right? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm going to say we're both too young to have seen them.
I know. I wish.
I wish indeed. Well, I'm afraid this is all we've had time for, but thank you so much. This has been a real delight, and I wish you all success with all the projects you've got coming up. And at Glimmerglass and at Chichester, Murder on the Orient Express and Tenor Overboard and everything else you've got coming up. And thank you for all the laughs you've given me. I still remember seeing Lend Me a Tenor quite a while ago, and just laughing till I cried. I thought it was so wonderful and so funny.
Thank you. I got to say, I said before we were on camera, I am such a huge fan of yours. I just read opera news. I can't wait. I stand at the outside waiting for the guy to deliver it. And your work, and it's fantastic. And I'm so privileged to meet you. And I hope this continues. I hope we can see each other.
Thank you very much. Yeah. We're going to have to adjust the film because I'm blushing now. My collar's gone up. Thank you very much, Ken Ludwig. This is F. Driscoll with another episode of Sightlines for Opera News. Thank you for watching.
Bye-bye.